Welcome to Weekly Homilies at St. Joseph Parish in York, Pennsylvania.
As I'm feeling a little in the recovery stage of being sick, I don't really want to walk around and cough on people, even though I'm not contagious, but it still looks bad, right? But, guys, today I want to talk about our social status. What is your social status? What does that mean? Is it important? And what is the Christian perspective of a social status? Let's dive in to Jeremiah. Today I'd like to preach about the first reading instead of the gospel or the second reading. Jeremiah, who was this guy? He knew all about social status. When we think about a social status, we might think, oh, how do people view me? How am I seen in the community? Whether business in the community, or how do people know me when I walk into the grocery store? Do I receive greetings? How about at work? Do people respect me at work? What's my social status at work? Or even online, on our phones, on various apps, on Facebook. What is my social status? How many friends do I have? Well, there's two types of social status. There's the worldly social status, and then there's Christ's social status. The status of heaven. So, Jeremiah knew all about this. Jeremiah, he was this guy who had a beard, obviously. Everybody back then had beards. All the prophets had beards. He was a prophet in the Old Testament. And like the prophets, they weren't always appreciated. In fact, none of them were by the people who they were preaching to. But God called them to do it anyway. This prophet Jeremiah lived in the 600s BC, so 600 years more or less before the birth of Jesus Christ. He was in the priestly class. He was born into an elite class, a rich class of people in the priesthood of the Old Testament. But God didn't call him to the priesthood only, he called him to the prophethood. That's a level up. That takes more energy. That takes more sacrifice and more beatings, actually. The prophethood was a beautiful office to hold, but in reality, it often led them to get arrested or even spat upon or ridiculed by their own people, the own people who they grew up with. He was known as the weeping prophet, Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, because he underwent so many things, and he also experienced what happened in the book of Lamentations. Now, in the book of Lamentations, the entire city of Jerusalem is destroyed. Now, don't read the book of Lamentations on a rainy day, okay? Don't do it. Read it on a sunny day in August when you're already in a good mood. Lamentations talks about when the temple and the city of Jerusalem is completely destroyed by enemies, and everybody is weeping and wearing sackcloth and ashes. So he experienced that as well. And he also experienced the triumph of two major enemies of Jerusalem, which was Samaria and Babylon. Okay, so Samaria, that was the location to the north. Jeremiah was called by God. God reached out to him and said, Jeremiah, I choose you to be a prophet. And he said, Lord, why me? I know what happens to prophets. Nobody likes prophets. And he said, I want you to bring your people, Israel, back to me. They're worshiping false gods because the Samaritans, the country above the Holy Land, they influenced the people of Israel with their religions of worshiping Baal. It was a god called Baal, B-A-A-L. And it's interesting because Baal, when you look up a picture of this false god or images made in memory of this false god, it looks like images of the devil. If you think about that, fascinating. And they were doing awful practices, such as sacrifices of not just animals, if you know what I mean. So these was a bad religion, but it was cool to be a Baal follower. And so the Israelites, they fell into this culture They wanted to be cool, and they wanted to elevate their social status and be worldly and avant-garde. And so they adopted this religion. So here comes Jeremiah saying, stop doing this. God is going to punish you. This is what's going to happen. And they said, we don't like what you're saying. We're going to arrest you. So they arrested him. He was imprisoned. There was also attempts on his life to kill Jeremiah. But he loved God so much and he loved his people so much that he wouldn't give up. And then later on, Babylon came in. What happened with Babylon and the Israelites? What did they do? They captured them. They enslaved the Israelites. So he also experienced the Babylonian captivity is what it's called. So all this is to say, the worldly social status doesn't equate to the heavenly social status. We would rather do the will of God and be judged by the world than do the will of the world and be judged by God. Think about that. We should rather do the will of God and be judged by the world than do worldly things and be judged by God. So, in the first reading, it talked about the cursed man and the blessed man, the cursed person and the blessed person. The cursed person is the one who follows the desires of the flesh, who follows the trends of the world and abandons everything else for that. But let's be honest, the trends of the world are just a flash in the pan. What trends last forever and ever? None. Right? So if one abandons their religion for what the world teaches, cursed be that person. And what does Jeremiah say? They say that person is like a dried up bush in the middle of the desert with no leaves. At one point, during the rainy season, it was growing and flourishing and it felt great. But then, like that, the dry season came and it died and withered. And then he talks about the blessed person. The blessed person is the one who clings to the eternal truth, not the fading trends. The eternal truth is religion, is our faith that will get us to heaven. Yes, the blessed person is like a tree alongside the banks of a river. Have you ever seen a tree alongside the banks of a river? What do the roots do? The roots kind of ball up, and then they even form part of the bank itself. It's a strong wall, and they go deep into the ground and even touch the water, and they soak up the water underneath. There was this fishing hole when I was a kid right behind my house. I loved to fish and grew up and fish in this hole. Sometimes we even swam in it. Antietam Creek, the east branch of the Antietam Creek. And it was so deep when I was a kid, it was up to here. And the reason why it was so deep and why that hole was formed is because there was this huge sugar maple tree that decided 50 years ago, 60 years ago, to have a seed. God decided to put a seed right there. And that tree grew right on the side of the bank, and it created a huge cliff underneath, over top of the water, where these huge trout would live. And this was that tree growing on the bank of the river, this beautiful old tree where the roots formed the bank. Not only grew into the bank, but formed the bank, and it stayed there forever. Trees around it fell over left and right, but that tree was strong because it not only was part of the bank, but it also had a lot of water directly going to it. So the just person is like that tree who clings to religion. Yes, there will be storms in life, like the storms that knocked over the trees around that tree, but you will be like that tree along the river. And you not only will be healthy, but you will also hold life for others. You will be a refuge for others, just like that tree fostered so much life, like the trout underneath of it. So, cursed and blessed. The cursed person is the one who follows the trends of the world, who replaces religion with all of these worldly things, fashion, other social movements. Stick to what is eternal, what has always been in our lives. And we are challenged to remind others of that. I really don't have to remind us of that, right? We're all here. We're all practicing Catholics. But I know for a fact each of you know somebody, maybe in your family or friends, that has abandoned their faith for the things of the world. What are we called to do? We're called to remind them gently and lovingly, not to scold them or correct them, but to remind them gently and lovingly that all of these things will fade away and pass like dust, like the bush in the desert. So, your social status, what do you want it to be? Do you want your social status to be cool and elevated in this world and nothing in the next life? Or do we want our social status to be enduring in this life and last forever and beautiful in the next life? If we choose the way of faith, yes, it will be hard. Just like for Jeremiah, it was not easy. He was arrested. People tried to kill him. That's not going to happen to us, I don't think, but it was still hard. It's worth it, though. It is worth it. A social elite. Don't be a social elite. Be a social example. Don't be a social elite. Be a social example. My mom, she's a tough lady. Yeah. My mom, she grew up in Baltimore, tough. She married my dad, and they moved to a small town in Waynesboro, and she decided after she had her first two kids, my brother and sister, that she would go for her law degree. She wanted to study law, so she decided, I'm just going to do it. And so she became an attorney, but she was not part of a firm. She was not a super high elite attorney. She was a defense attorney for the little person, and she had her office out of our home, my childhood home. It was a farmhouse down a farm lane. And, other lawyers in town might look at her and say, oh, she's just, a fake lawyer, or she just does tiny little jobs, or she has her office out of her house. Are you serious? That's silly, But people flocked to her because they trusted her, right? She wasn't high up on the social status ladder, but she had this beautiful love of the little person that needed help. And so much so that even the Amish went to her for help, right? So they trusted her. So we need to identify in the same way the social example as opposed to social status. We want to be that tree that clings to the bank and forms the bank, not the dried up bush in the desert. So how do we do that? We eliminate our social status in this life, and we diminish it so that we can focus completely on the heavenly status, that which is to come. Think today, think at this Mass, what are our expectations of our lives? What do we feel that people expect of us? What our neighbors think what kind of car we should drive, or how we should compete with our friends at work? No. Because the one who is the healthy one, the spiritually healthy one, is the one who sacrifices the desires of this life so that they can grow in virtue for the next life. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen.
Thank you for listening to our weekly homilies at St. Joseph Parish in York, Pennsylvania. To learn more about us, visit us at www.sjy.org. Find us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.